If you are depressed or sad right now, I want to help you with these 10 book recommendations I am about to deliver to your consciousness. And my name is Ian, and here on Right Conscious, we talk about the best books and authors of all time. But I also help readers like you activate so that you can not only use literature as something to pass the time and to gain knowledge from, but also let change your life. And as I'm about to talk about in a couple minutes, I have suffered from really bad depression in my life. And the saving grace for me was actually books, because I'm not going to sit here and say that the 10 books I'm going to recommend to you are going to cure your depression. It won't. But I can guarantee you that the time spent reading them will be better than doing nothing, better than doom scrolling, better than sitting in whatever toxic habits you have. Because I know that when you read these recommendations online of you should be exercising and have a cardio regimen, you should be journaling and hanging out with friends and getting sunshine and doing all these things if you have depression, seeing a therapist. But many of those actually require a fair amount of effort that when you're at rock bottom, you just don't have. And so with the small amount of energy you do have, many people over the past couple years have slipped into a technological prison instead of sitting with books, with stories that can do something inside of you. And I should say, do something positive or sometimes even negative inside of you that at least gets the energy moving. And I'll just share my story really fast with you guys. It won't take very long. So years ago, long before I was married and had a kid, I was dating someone else. I've dated people all throughout my life. But in this relationship, I got financially tied to this person. A house that we were renting, cars, pets, a lifestyle, posting each other on social media, all of this stuff. But the relationship was really, really toxic. It was so bad that I fell into this deep state of depression and felt like killing myself. And I felt like there was no way out. I felt like I couldn't tell anyone. And so for about a year, I did nothing. I worked a part-time job and was just sad all of the time. And this was kind of a huge contrast from the start of my life in the first, however many years, because I was doing martial arts and exercising and happy and coded myself to be this super positive person. But I had never prepared myself to get into a really sticky situation with someone who kind of flipped the script on me. And so what I started to do was read even more. I was reading a ton before that. And then I fell off the train of reading. And actually, even worse, fell off the train of writing for, I think, 15 months. I didn't write a sentence. And then for a while, I wasn't reading either. But then I said one day, wait, I can read. No matter what is going on, I can go to the park away from this toxic house. And thank God the weather in Las Vegas is usually pretty good. And it was the winter and spring and fall. And I just started to read. And I read over 150 books. And looking back, it was one of the integral things that gave me the strength to leave. Gaining that independence, being able to think and to feel and get out of this controlling environment where all my thoughts, all my actions, all how I felt about the world was, being criticized. I could be free again in my own head. And with these authors, I could reconnect back to my dream of being a writer and being someone who, would talk about books. I had the idea of this YouTube channel, Conscious Writers Tribe, that I was telling everyone. But that my ex said, oh no, that's a stupid idea. I don't want us to be online, blah, blah, blah. Go get a job, like that type of shit. But I had this dream. I was like, I know I can do it. The whispers of the literary renaissance were there. And the situation I'm talking about happened almost a decade ago now. And once I got out of that, I fell into depressed states again, just because of life and loss and longing and all these different things growing up. Never as bad as the state I was in. And every single time, one of the things that helped me get out of the slump was reading. Funny enough, just recently, last November, I just had my daughter, and my wife and I had our daughter, and absolutely amazing experience. But, having to maintain a full-time job, and my wife was working and hold down the house and all these other various things and crazy things that came up was like a lot on me. And a lot of the self-care stuff that I normally have done throughout my entire life, fell to the wayside. And I was in this huge slump. And lo and behold, me reading a bunch of classics in the Right Conscious Book Club, which I'll talk about later, and, rededicating myself back to reading, at least 10 major works of fiction a month, plus a bunch of other stuff that I just read for fun, reinvigorated me again. And I know it's the same for so many other people. My friend up in Portland, Kyler, shout out Hillsboro, Oregon, he has seasonal depression because of the weather. Every single year it gets really bad. And he doubles down on reading also and feels like it can help. And so once again, the books I'm going to talk about today aren't just this entertainment fluff. These aren't things to pass the time, because they can help. Dopamine raising novels can help. Speaking of the PNW, my debut novel, He Came from the Woods, is coming out on July 20th. Bigfoot erotica genre. Shout out to me. Shout out to all my Bigfoot erotica authors out there. We are the literary renaissance. But, tickling the pickle of weird men's dopamine brains in Bellingham, Washington, or housewives down in Tacoma with my beautiful Bigfoot erotica novel isn't going to help depression most of the time. And most likely that dopamine cycle that they're going to be caught up in isn't going to be what they need at that moment. It's almost no different than just doom scrolling. So first up is, of course, Never Let Me Go by Kashro Ishiguro. And Ishiguro a couple years ago deservedly won the Nobel Prize in Literature. And the reason I picked this one is that this is a depressing novel. This necessarily isn't a happy-go-lucky novel. It's about a bunch of clones in England who are in this boarding school who are eventually going to have their organs harvested. And they all know it. And their life is on this very short timeline. And so that's one of the reasons why this novel smacks, though, because it shows you the time you are wasting. It shows you the kind of evolution of life and emotions, love, loss, longing, sadness, the chase of identity, all within a very short time frame. Usually that takes a lifetime, that takes a memoir to be able to do this. But this novel is the best example of multiple lives being lived out to its completion. They literally call that the death, and when they die from their organs getting harvested, when they complete. It's the best novel for that ever. And when you are depressed, something that you should be thinking about is your life and what you want to be doing, if this is what you want 5 to 10 years down the road. And that's one of the most powerful personal development hacks ever, is to imagine, talking to your best self 5 or 10 years down the road, someone who's accomplished everything that you want to accomplish, and just discuss with them, like, what did you do? How do you feel? And then trying to match that vibe, trying to take similar steps to what they did. Because a lot of the time, our best self isn't someone that has the money and the hot girlfriend and all these different things, and our problems are all solved. What it is that person has a different vibe. We all know it. We all know people who are in the worst fucking situation, way worse than us, have had a more traumatic life than us, but they maintain a vibe and then it attracts more good things to them. And in general, if any of you guys look back at your life, you're in this depressed vibe right now, and look back to a point where your vibration, if I want to use the full term, was at a much more positive level, you'll most likely see that how you moved through life was much more fluid. Things would come to you. There was a lot less neediness, a lot less force. But when you are depressed, when you're at a really low point, everything feels like a stretch. Everything feels needy. You feel like a burden to everyone, even yourself. And so one of the best ways, like I said, to get out of that is to view this new vibe, and then view the distance and not worry about the action, not worry about the cardio regimen necessarily for a minute, but try to align and feel like what it would feel like to be this new person. And unfortunately, in Never Let Me Go, the characters don't have that opportunity. Their life path is set. Their timeline is set in stone. And by witnessing these kids who dream and want all of these things have to go to completion way too early, so that people can live much longer. That's the premise of the novel. If we solve cancer, if we solve any of these many of these diseases, the only thing that can really kill us, especially really early, is, organs failing. And the only way to get that and get a lot of it is through clones. And so through these kids' and teenagers and young adults activation, you can hopefully start to have something stir within you, because this is a cozy novel. This is a literary novel. Ishiguro is the master of unreliable narration. His bibliography is a masterclass on the unreliable narrator. And as someone who is sad or depressed, guess what? You are most likely an unreliable witness to your reality. And I don't want to discount what you are going through, but the same could be said of the toxically positive people, the people who see everything through a lens of optimism. And when you look at most of the happiest people in the world, they are in balance. When you look at most religions, they don't advocate for you to be this ecstatic figure, but rather to be in balance, to be able to control your emotional states, and then at will go down into the underworld or into the heavens to get what you need to get, and then come back down to earth. Because one of the things that also happens with depression is that you get addicted to that state. Same with toxically positive people, It becomes a pattern that eventually you have to break. And books are better than anything at breaking patterns. And so Ishiguro and many of his more popular novels, I would say, are a good fit because they're a good balance of kind of melancholic, but also people trying to live, people trying to see, people trying to take their perception to the next level, which if you can do in your depression, it's one of those kind of axiomatic steps, as I've been saying, to something later on down the road. So next we have 2 German selections, and you could read almost anything from Thomas Mann or Hermann Hesse. I have The Magic Mountain right here and Siddhartha. And it's because I also feel like that the German language, even though we are reading this in translation, has a certain coldness to it, has a certain sort of precision. When you look at many of the great German philosophers, Heidegger, Nietzsche, Schelling, Hegel, or at least authors that were writing, in the German language. And even many of their prose authors or poets like Novalis and Hölderlin, a lot of the fluff that is in French writing, Italian musical writing, in the Espanol, it isn't there. And that's important because musicality flourishes, purple writing are all great. But when you aren't feeling great, then you don't have too much energy to give out. And so you probably want the best bang for your buck in terms of literary fiction. I know that in those deep states of I have no energy, I didn't want to be reading Crime and Punishment. I didn't want to be reading Gravity's Rainbow or some of these postmodernist works because I just didn't have the energy. But I also was yearning for some form of depth. And I feel like Hesse and Mann, who were both friends, are, contrary to Vladimir Nabokov's opinion, very good writers. And many of their works deal in dualities. Many of the German writers deal with the spirit. And what Damon right here by Hermann Hesse will not do for you is give you a field guide to your trauma or escaping it. But what Damon is about is providing meaning to your depression, to your suffering. And funny enough, who else did the German language produce? German, Austrian, not to conflate the two because, people get mad, but, same region, same kind of, very, general philosophy, especially with a shared language. We have Freud and Carl Jung, speaking of depression and finding individuation. And just a side note about depression, I love that we have more depressed people than ever. And, cognitive, behavioral therapy is being shoved down our throats. And, as this data-driven way to help people solve their problems and escape depression and all that psychoanalytic collective consciousness, you can't prove that nonsense is a bunch of shit. But almost every person I know personally, including myself, that escaped their depression, escaped their addiction, did not do it through data-driven approaches. They did it sometimes through sheer will, but actually most of the time through the spirit, through God. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that. Through connecting to some transcendent image, even if it was their higher self or whatever it is. Because I also know atheists who have done this, but they didn't do it through fatalism, through cynicism. They did it through some form of the transcendent and the recognition of the split self. And so what Damon kind of explores is this question of why can't I be who I am? Because many people who are depressed, you know, I remember that I would have these melancholic kind of cynical thoughts growing up, and my family, you know, tried to remain toxically positive. And I know many of you guys dealt with something similar, or your spouse or people at your work. And, you know, you say something, you're like, dude, this fucking, you know, you say something about even death, and everyone just somewhat rejects it. And so you have to change who you are. And so you have to have this split self and hide off kind of this more dark aspect of yourself. And that's how the shadow and repression starts to get built up. That's how, you know, have the bill, can't see it, it's right up here. You know, Wilhelm Reich, speaking of Germans or Austrians, you know, theorized that fascism, you know, came from all this repression, all this sexual repression. And then it was eventually, expanded even more in this book called Male Fantasies that I'm pointing out up here. But nonetheless, Damon is about this character, Sinclair, who is suffering from this enigma. He's in this middle-class lifestyle and feels alienated. And so the novel's about a boy named Damon who enters Sinclair's life and sends him into this descent. And it's not nihilistic, it is dark, but it is kind of a good exploration with a thread of hope, which I'm trying to keep in this, you know. Maybe or maybe not. You'll have to wait and see. We will have some novels, that are more nihilistic in nature. But in general, I feel like it's good to explore the dark, but always have a way out. Because the people that I know that have gone down from suicide, from overdoses, who, you know, have done things or, you know, lived a lifestyle that they're still paying for now, they never had that thread of hope. And a lot of the other people I know who were in a dark place that had that, most of them got out. And so Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse is also good because it explores Eastern philosophy and can kind of be a bridge, and has been a bridge for tens of millions of people into Eastern philosophy, meditation, Buddhism, yoga, all of those things, which in my opinion are some of the best ways to escape a depression. You know, anyway, Eastern philosophy is great. And then over here, we also have Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, which is very similar. It's almost a reverse Never Let Me Go. So in Never Let Me Go, we have this constrained timeline where these characters have to live faster. But The Magic Mountain is basically the opposite, where the main character Hans gets removed from this German working mentality and is placed in this sanatorium where time dissolves, where, you know, identity and reality moves away, and what was expected to be a 3-week stay actually turns into a 7-year stay. And, you know, that's an interesting sentiment to me, and I think, you know, it speaks powerfully to many people, because I don't think people realize that when this, you know, it's hard to pinpoint unless there was a traumatic experience where your depression starts and how long it's going to last. And sometimes you're in the fog like Hans is in this, and it's this entire process. And so I think Mann's novel, which is, you know, pretty long, it's a pretty lengthy, around 700 pages, and the text isn't very big, of prose, you know, kind of showing you guys this slow experience. This one is a little bit heftier in terms of reading than the Hesse books. But if you're up for it, you know, I always recommend Thomas Mann. I mean, if you can get through this, I think that these are all transformative novels. I'm not going to be showing you guys something that isn't transformative, but let's continue forward. So next on the list, we have One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And this is somewhat of a cliche pick, but Ken Kesey has been on my mind because in the Right Conscious Book Club, which is the most active book club in the world, if you want to be a part of a book club, that will hold you accountable, that will activate you, that reads transformative novels that aren't bleak but do have an uplifting quality to them. We read multiple books every single week and meet up every single Saturday morning over on the Right Conscious Substack, which you guys can see on the screen right now. I have a book club, a podcast. I have a ton of literature and writing courses and a ton of really cool stuff. And if you support the mission of this channel, you know, I have a really cool new video on how to become a symbol literate reader, where I go over different symbols and stuff in the Bible and the occult and in all different forms of stuff and I provide a list of 500 things that you should know so that you understand symbols, because symbols come up in literature all the time. And so if you are interested in the book club, we are actually reading Ken Kesey's other novel in September. I have the schedule out for the next 3 months, Sometimes a Great Notion. And so Ken Kesey has been on my mind, and many people have seen the movie with Jack Nicholson, you know, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But the novel is way better. The novel is from the point of view of Chief and has this, you know, literally has a foggy feel to it. and can hopefully alleviate some of the polarization that has happened to you in regards of being the weird person, of being the depressed person, of being the crazy person. I mean, let's just be honest here. Everyone else around you is probably not hoorah that you are depressed right now. Everyone's, your partner, your parents, everyone else, that doesn't even know you isn't too excited. One rotten egg spoils the bunch, maybe you've heard before. One Debbie Downer can ruin the entire vibe of the group. And that may be you right now, or maybe you internally. And so sometimes the best way to not feel crazy, to not feel like that, is to just make the whole thing ironic. And One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is kind of a really nice exploration of the malignant qualities of our mental health institutions, because something that we no longer have anymore, because I think Jimmy Carter and Nixon and stuff actually ended them, are mental health institutions, like state-run ones. Because when you look at the history of like mental institutions, which go back a while, and Bethlehem Royal Hospital in England, where, dudes sent their wives that were a little bit emotional or slightly depressed. And the terrible history of mental institutions, it's crazy. But when you look now at the crises we have in Europe and America, mental health crises, I live in Tucson, Arizona, and I literally saw someone the other day just popping the needle in their arm. Like, there's fent walkers, no offense, everywhere, fent walking, and crime is crazy, and people are like, it's a housing crisis. And it's like, dude, are you guys fucking dumb? This is a mental health crisis. These people need legitimate help. And so we have not reimagined with our modern conception, because we would never give up that type of money and take it away from our defense budget, what modern state mental health institutions would look like. And so this is kind of the glorification of the hero in the old model. But nonetheless, what's interesting is that many people and many families' conception of depression and crazy people have not evolved since this time either. All the boomers and stuff, they still act like Nurse Ratched. They still kind of have this mentality of silence, of indifference. It's crazy. I've been close to people. I have a friend, and his family thinks he's crazy. And when I've been over there at his house for like dinner or for barbecues or whatever, and this was years ago, he would say something and people would just ignore him, just outright. And he would be like, are you not responding to me? And they just like turn and walk away. And I don't know all the inner workings, but I knew that guy really well. And it was like, holy shit, just because he was different, everyone basically, unless he was just being pleasant, just outright shunned him. And when I lived in Utah with all the Mormons, that's what happened too. Oh my God, can you guys imagine me around a bunch of Mormons at Utah State University? Especially the more extroverted, outspoken me. Oh my God. And so having some laughs, seeing the system from an ironic point of view, this entire mental health system of where we send the crazies, where we send the depressed, and Kesey's writing and the characters, it will just elevate you. It's just a fun time. Then you can watch the movie. You can read Kesey's other book. You can take some LSD, listen to the Grateful Dead. Oh, wait, sorry. You don't want to end up like this guy. You don't want to end up like Hal Incandenza from Infinite Jest, which is our next book. Just joking. I'm not going to throw Infinite Jest into this one. I mean, if you are depressed and you are a heavy reader, I mean, Infinite Jest is, a decent pick for this list. But everyone's, when I started making these top 10 videos, someone commented who was ignorant. It's like, it's just a bunch of Blood Meridian and Infinite Jest selections every video. And it's like, dude, shut up. And hopefully after I make like 200 of these and we talk about hundreds of different novels, if not thousands of different novels, I have so many in my head. Luckily, I've kept a catalog of the thousands of novels I've read. Then hopefully I can break free of some of my Cormac and David Foster Wallace associations that it's all I talk about. And so next on our list is none other than Haruki Murakami and his novel Norwegian Wood. And Murakami's work, more so than anyone else, helped me in my depressive state. I read his entire bibliography across 4 or 5 months, and him more than anyone, I would say, helped me personally, because Murakami is not scared to deal with suicide, with depression. Norwegian Wood is about this depressed girl who goes, much like, Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain, to this sanatorium in the mountains. And there's a light magical realism happening, very, very, very light, less so than any of his other novels. But it's also dealing with identity and growth, about leaving the past behind. Many of the trauma, many of the things that people who are depressed get bogged down into. And once again, one of the best ways to quantum leap your way out of depression other than just popping the pills, let's go Prozac or whatever the hell people are taking today, is through the spirit, through some form of magical perception toward reality. And Murakami, as I talked about in my last video on magical realism, does that better than any other author. I can talk through many of his novels. Colorless Chizuruki and his many years of pilgrimage, if that's what it's called, is about this journey of a depressed man. I'm just going to fuck up every single pronunciation, so don't mind me. Killing Commendatore, whatever that novel is called, is about this Gatsby type figure who has retreated out to the mountains as this artist and is depressed. Many of Murakami's protagonists are these Japanese men who are just slightly depressed, and then things happen to them that send them down this rabbit hole. Because when you're depressed, as I was saying earlier, people don't want to be around you. Many of Murakami's characters are kind of these blah characters, and their wife cheats on them. Their cat runs away. And that's what happens. I literally know someone who is pretty depressed and has been for a long time, and their cat ran away. I know plenty of men and women who have been left because their partner was depressed and they just couldn't handle it anymore. Do I want to be with this Debbie Downer for another day or for another decade or another 6 decades? And so Murakami kind of sensationalizes all of this and forces his characters to individuate, forces them into magic, forces them into the most potent way that I've been talking about throughout this series. And he does it in a very lighthearted way. I mean, if you are depressed, this is probably one of the first places that I would look. Norwegian Wood, which has blown up in popularity because of book talk, which isn't a bad thing in the sense that I'm glad that people are reading books, especially conscious books. But this new Generation Z, is more depressed, more unhealthy, more unhappy, less smart than ever. And so when they, rally around a book that is literary, that is decades old, 3 decades old, and they say, this is helping me, then I think that it's relevant for many of us, especially under the age of 40, that this is kind of a cultural icon. This is one of these cult classics that we can look back to and be like, okay, wow, this means something. And I will stand and plead with you guys that Murakami is the real deal, that the character choices that happen sometimes can be bizarre, but if you can get beyond that and maybe some of the talk about, breasts and some other things, which some people may have a problem with if they're super virtue signally or weird, twitching, then I think you'll absolutely love him. And like I said, his catalog runs deep. His short stories are fire. His nonfiction stories are fire. His thoughts on writing are amazing and very relevant to, I think, everyone and can really help people. And so, yeah, Murakami is just, I think, a catapult into higher realms of thinking. So I feel like as we progress and I'm looking kind of down the list that's actually in my head, I'm like, oh shit, there's a lot of people that have killed themselves coming up. But, who is better? One of my favorite comments about when I talk about Mishima or David Foster Wallace are people that are like, why would I listen to a guy that killed himself? And it's like, why the hell would anyone want to hear your comment from a random person who's done nothing and is probably going to do nothing? Just because the end of someone's life didn't work out because of their depression, because of whatever problem they have, and they commit suicide, doesn't mean that the rest of their life becomes automatically void. And this is a part of our suicide hotline programming that we have over here in the West, that we try to sterilize depression. We try to just throw it away and institutionalize it, CBT out of someone, David Goggins it out of someone, instead of just sitting with it, instead of as a culture kind of embodying it and accepting it and not being scared of it. What's it called? Yokigara Forest or whatever it's called, where Jake Paul and Logan Paul went and found the person hanging, whatever that's called. It's there. We don't have that necessarily here. We don't have a cultural place for people to go and off themselves. Not to say that we need that, but the reason I'm mentioning all of this is that the reason why depressed people and especially depressed writers are so good is sometimes they see both sides of the aisle. They can write ecstatically and they can write from a source of depression. And someone who can do that really well is Yukio Mishima, especially in his earlier novels. And so Mishima later in his career went down this political and philosophical rabbit hole that, in my opinion, can be very rewarding for people like me who are really into transcendent art and politics and art as action in reality. But for other people, they're kind of like, what the fuck? And so Mishima has 2 novels that I would recommend for anyone who is depressed, and that is The Sound of Waves and Confessions of a Mask. And these are his earlier novels that are kind of love stories, that are romance stories. They feature characters, especially in Confessions of a Mask, who are depressed and are trying to kind of maneuver their way out of it. Characters who feel like they can't be themselves in the world. And so The Sound of Waves, I'm not really plugging this because we're reading it and we're covering it in our book club in 2 days. So unless you get the PDF right now and read through it, you probably are going to miss the book club. But this is a love story by Mishima. I wanted to put this in here because love stories are actually very important. But I feel like love stories, especially in the romance genre and the book talk genre and the romanticy genre, have been totally collapsed. They feel flat. They do something that Robert Bly called horizontal thinking in their horizontal art. They're looking around at, their partner and the society, and they're not doing something called vertical art or vertical thinking, where they're looking to the gods and looking to the underworld. They don't know how to write in a depressive state or write in an ecstatic state. And Mishima knows how to do that as good as anybody. He can make you soar with his descriptions of emotions or nature, and he can make you feel melancholic with his work. And The Sound of Waves is my favorite love story by him. Mishima has a nice catalog of love stories, but most of the time they end up very bleakly. Someone dies or, some weird shit happens. And this one, not to spoil anything, is much different. It's a simple story of a young man named Shinji, if I remember his name correctly, who is a fisherman, and he falls in love with this other girl. And there's some love triangle, small island drama that happens, but you get this pure kind of taste of love, of what it's supposed to mean, without all of the BS, without all of the fluff. And then on top of that, you get some of Mishima's kind of idiosyncrasies. You get that literary style. You get Japan, which has this kind of refreshing feel to it, especially for us Westerners. And so I 100% recommend people getting into Mishima because he's also an activator. He's someone that can help you get off your ass, especially if you're a man. Actually, I know a woman. I don't know if you're listening right now, but there's Bianca out there who's a killer over on Substack, has written some cool stuff, is pretty active on Substack Notes. And Bianca is a huge fan of Mishima and will tell you right now, if she is in the comments, how he has changed her life and helped her with many of her problems. And I just feel like the more someone can activate you, the more effective they'll be with your depression. And like I said, there are people like Ishiguro or even Murakami that you can sit with, that you can vibe with. And then there are people that punch you in the face. That was a really wussy punch, man. I need to hit a better cross that can, wake you up and say, okay, what am I doing? And Mishima is one of my favorite people for that. If you want a more samurai oriented story, there's also Musashi back here, by Yoshikawa, that I would also maybe throw in, but it's a little bit more like, you would have to be like kind of like a depressed nerd, like, wah, I want to have, I am a samurai, You could also go read like the Book of Five Rings by Musashi, literally, if you don't want to read the book about him, and many of the other like kind of samurai canonical texts to kind of activate you and to make you move. Like those are, this is a story about a video about novels, but I personally find that those texts, can help activate me. So next we have a Cormac McCarthy novel, I'm sorry, and it's Sutri. Sutri is probably Cormac McCarthy's best novel. If you've ever heard people talk about Blood Meridian or all the Crossing, it's mostly a personal taste. Aesthetically, objectively, Sutri is his strongest work. He does stuff with language in this that I don't think, he reaches a pinnacle with language and metaphor and feeling and restraint and symbolism that I don't think this is going out on a limb here, everyone, that I don't think any author has ever achieved. Like, for instance, my baby was a breech baby, that was born. And him describing Sutri that was a breech baby made me literally break down in tears, because the way he describes it over the course of a paragraph, which most people just pass by and not know what the fuck he's talking about, is so layered and deep that I will say right now that Proust, James Joyce, anyone that you want to put it up against, Faulkner, they can't fuck with this. No one, this might be one of the greatest greatest books ever written. And when we're talking about a book about depression, this novel is about a man named Cornelius Sutri, who is a rambler. His family, the Sutris, are this kind of wealthy family who eventually, that Sutri doesn't resonate with. So he decides to just go be this fisherman. So he fishes and basically is an alcoholic and is just chronically depressed. And you don't hear about it. There is little to no interiority in this novel. And so we're getting all this through McCarthy ranting about nature and about and the symbols he puts in and his descriptions of Sutri, but we never really hear from Sutri other than these moments where he has these breakdowns. And Sutri is going to the brinks of everything: nature, love, alcoholism, jail, so many different things. He's going to the utmost sickness, the utmost extremes to pull himself out of this depression. Because what most people don't realize is that your depression is coming from your family problems. So I love the show Loveline. I don't know if any of you guys out there ever listened to the show with Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew, but it used to be syndicated in the late 90s and early 2000s in the United States. And Loveline was the show where people would call in and ask Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla about their problems. And this was long before Adam Carolla became the podcaster, and now he's like on, kind of this conservative commentator on the Daily Wire. But something that the main thing you learn if you listen to all the shows, and I went back in like high school and listened to all the shows, is that everyone's problems most of the time is because of their parents. Daniele Bolelli, who does the history podcast, History on Fire, which is one of the best podcasts out there, especially history podcasts. If you like Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, the Martyr Made podcast, the Revolutions podcast, I forget that dude's name, that does those. History on Fire is one of the best also, if you can get over Bolelli's Italian accent. But nonetheless, his most recent episode, and everyone should go check it out, is about how these people like Joseph Stalin and Winston Churchill and many of these figures that were extreme and crazy. People like Winston Churchill was crazy. Yes, he was a pretty wild individual. Nonetheless, they had bad fathers, and that many of the worst people in history had bad fathers. And many of the best people in history had bad fathers and bad parents. I mean, it's kind of logical, right? But Cormac McCarthy was in the exact same boat. Cormac McCarthy was depressed for most of his life until he kind of made it big because of his parents. His dad was the valedictorian of the Yale Law School. Look up the alumni of the Yale Law School right now. Literally, go to Wikipedia. Hillary Clinton, J.D. Vance, not to say that they are smart individuals, but some of the most powerful people in our country went to the Yale Law School. And so McCarthy's dad was this valedictorian, moved and was this one of the heads of the government in Tennessee, and McCarthy didn't resonate with him. He was like, dude, you are ruining this culture. And so he broke away from his father. But breaking away from the father and your siblings that are going to law school and prestigious Northeastern colleges to become this writer isn't an easy journey. Imagine the journey you've been on. Imagine breaking, not to objectify or subjectify and bring your experience into this, but think of everything you've sacrificed to be different, to go a little bit further. And imagine what McCarthy went through. That dude starved for multiple decades. That dude had multiple marriages ruined to pursue his artistic career. And that made him utterly depressed. He gave up everything to be a writer, to write these types of novels and reject his family. And as soon as he could leave Tennessee and move to the Southwest when he made a little bit of money, he did. And so this is one of the greatest Southern Gothic novels of all time. It's one of the greatest novels on depression of all time. If you know how to read between the lines, McCarthy is a mix of Hemingway, who writes some of the best field guides on trauma ever. I mean, maybe we'll talk about Hemingway later. Maybe we won't. He's a mixture of Hemingway, Joyce, Faulkner, and so many other authors. And what he does better than them is taking their best things and leaving all of the bad. And so if you feel constrained right now, let's say you are living somewhere with your family, with a partner, in some place you don't want to be, and you feel like you can't get out yet. For instance, I'm here in Tucson, and every single summer, it gets so hot, you guys. It's like 107 today, and the monsoon season hasn't kicked in. And it was even worse when I lived in Las Vegas because we got no monsoonal rains. And every single summer, I get reverse seasonal depression because I can't leave my house. I can't do anything. If I'm not up at 5 a.m., then it's blazing hot. I mean, right now it's nighttime and it's still 99 degrees outside and there's like mosquitoes, which are fine, but it's just like all these obstacles. And so I can't spend as much time outside. And so, I dream of what if I lived here or what if I lived there? And I know from making the move from Vegas to here, my life and, melancholic thoughts got way better. And maybe, for some people who live in Portland and they need sun, you can make this move. And so many people feel constrained. And this is the best novel about kind of being constrained in a place and needing to leave all your old friends and habits and all these things behind. That's not this kind of very internal kind of piece of work. And so next on our list is David Foster Wallace's short story collection, which isn't a novel, but we'll count it. It's a group of connected stories, brief interviews with hideous men. And this is absolutely a wonderful book that I think many of you guys should read. But specifically, if you do not want to read this, there is a story in this called The Depressed Person. If you type in to Google right now, The Depressed Person, David Foster Wallace, you will get a PDF, that someone uploaded that you can read. And The Depressed Person is really good because it dramatizes the structure of depression, not the symptoms. And what Wallace does is that many stories about depression talk about the sadness and the loss and the feelings. But what does it really feel like to have depression from an internal point of view? And Wallace is like a master of this, like the justifications, the starting and stopping, the qualifications for everything you feel, the self-monitoring, these apologies that just spiral are inundated or just happen time and time again in this story. And why I love this is that the depressed person, isn't romanticized. Many novels, maybe the Bellagar, some of these other novels, there's this romantic image of this depressed person. But in this one, you are absolutely going to hate this chick. It's like exhausting to read. And it's like she's a manipulator and all these things. And I don't really like her. And as I've been kind of saying, being too depressed can be repulsive, especially if you're like really upfront about it. And one of the problems with depression, and that Wallace almost critiques, here I am making an entire video of this, is the fallacy of the talking cure, that language can not just cure depression, but can even define it. That being able to describe your feelings of depression is basically impossible. And Wallace, one of his main strengths is being able to show these things that, that are basically impossible to communicate. And Wallace is also asking, how far are you willing to extend your hand for someone who is depressed when they are exhausting, when they are just tirelessly, depressed and in a negative state? And how willing are you to put up with that? Wallace, tells these stories about, these people that need help and he just doesn't want to help them, that are in his personal life. And we've all been there before, the person that always has a problem. It's just this endless loop. And how far are you willing to go, especially if they're someone you're reading about in a story, or if they're, a friend, but not a great friend. And, this random person at your job, how willing are you going to be to deal with all the bullshit that they bring to the table? All the stuckness, because that's what it is most of the time. Depression is the stuckness. And here you are in this flow state and someone else is slogging along and you have to walk at their speed. And so another reason this is great is because Wallace obviously dealt with depression throughout his entire life, and and ultimately succumbed to it through depression, and so through suicide. And so all of his work, in Infinite Jest, the Kate Gompert sections, the Howlin' Condensa sections, the Oren sections, the Joel sections also deal with depression at a very, very deep level, and are probably a little bit better, but they're kind of interlaced within this 1,100-page novel. So next we have The Bellagar by Sylvia Plath, and this isn't, one of my favorite novels of all time, but I think in the context of this video that it's very important and definitely should make the list. And so I like this one because it paints this portrait of Esther Greenwood, this ambitious, literary woman, girl, whatever we want to call her, who should be this happy person. I mean, she's funny, she's talented, she has this ambition, she has an internship at this fashion magazine. That's like everyone's like the Rory Gilmore dream, right? That's presented on Gilmore Girls, that, the dream of feminism, right? But, one of the things that feminism had to come to terms with is that the working world and this world of capitalism is a very hollow thing, that in general, you don't get fulfillment from these pursuits a lot of the time. Like if you have a divine mission, like literary renaissance, let's go, I feel great. But even at my job, like if I was only an English teacher, guys, which is my day job right now, and if you guys want to support me so that I can make content full time, joining the Substack is always a great way to do it. Sending a donation, like whatever, just liking the video, commenting to help boost me on the algorithm. It would mean a lot to me. because I don't know when I'll be able to do it, but one day, I'm doing all this while managing a family, a house, a job. But anyway, if I was just an English teacher, I could really feel, the monotony and basically the bleakness of it, that, I help 1 to 5 kids a year. Even if I go as hard as possible, I help 1 to 5 kids a year. If I just am a chill dude that does nothing with the classes, I help 1 to 5 kids a year, actually. And so that's something that Plath kind of tapped into early, is that when women have now the opportunity to be ambitious, it is freeing. But a lot of the time, it's just a new prison. And the only way out of that prison has always been the spiritual or the transcendent path, or the path of just being, awareness, the ontology of phenomenology. But you can see very fast that Esther in this novel is depressed, that she has these problems. And the Bellagar metaphor of, being trapped and being suffocated is one of the more potent, metaphors of depression, ever written. Because what makes it really good is that when you're in this jar, imagine you're in this jar and you're being suffocated. Well, you're being suffocated, but life is right around you. You're not shut into your room. You're still able to see everything outside of the dome, but there is this separation from it. You've been numbed. And I like this novel because it's proto-postmodern. It's proto-sad girl. It's proto-sad boy. It really is tapping into feelings. That's why Plath is so innovative, that people aren't really going to start to feel and identify in mass until, 15 years ago. And so this one's also good because there's, I'm not spoiling anything. It's not a happy novel. It's a bleak novel. There is no real, it gives you witness and voice to what you are going through, but it isn't the happiest thing. And so this one, if we're talking about novels about people who are depressed and getting in their minds and actually having interiority that's lacking in, some of these other novels like Sutri, this is, always kind of a classic novel. And so let's flip the script. So here we go. Tom Robbins, everybody, one of my favorite authors, one of the greatest novelists to ever grace the literary world, who just died. Shout out Pacific Northwest, the collective of writers up there. And Tom Robbins, through that P&W freeze, wrote some of the more happy novels of all time. At some point, you have to change the storyline if you are depressed. You have to stop telling yourself that it's bleak and there's no one to love. And you got to become a little bit radical. You got to become an anarchist. You have to become an unconditional lover. You have to take some risks. You have to let yourself open up and become so great that you don't meet some dumb idiot that's going to screw you over more, but attract people that are going to uplift you. Because that's one of the other things about depression, is depressed people, a lot of the time, this could be a whole fucking video, but a lot of the time depressed people have this inner light within them. They have the it factor. They have that source of energy, but it's not been handled correctly by their upbringing or even by themselves. And so that source of energy within you is actually a something that the energy vampires out there want to control. There are literal people out there, you guys, I'm sure you know this, but maybe you don't, who want to exploit your energetic presence. And it's easiest to do that with depressed people, with people who are wayward and lost, but still have the thread of hope within them, still have this hope of recovery. And finding someone in that exploitable position and smashing them is a fetish for these people. It's one of the oldest practices of sorcery, or whatever you want to call it, that malignant mindset, dark sorcery, I should say. And so Jitterbug Perfume is about this group, this man and woman who are immortal and are in love and go throughout time and eventually, separate, and there's drama in these things, but it's the ultimate love story. Earlier, I talked about The Sound of Waves by Yukio Mishima, and that one is good. But Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins and Still Life with Woodpecker by Tom Robbins are the love story of our generation, of the type of love that we need in our life, that we are looking for, that can heal your depression. In Robbins' book, Still Life with Woodpecker, there is literally a scene of 70 pages where the character Le Cherie is depressed and in her attic. She is going through hardcore depression. Her lover is basically separated from her and she can't be with him, and she goes through this huge depression, and he actually gives you a model of how to get out of it. In Still Life with Woodpecker, he prescribes what I've prescribed on this channel since 2017, which is finding objecthood, which is focusing on things. That if you can find the beauty in a thing. Because remember earlier I was saying that depressed people don't have clarity. Well, one of the best ways to gain clarity, and this is what the modernists realized, is by being able to focus on an object. And Leigh Cherie in Still Life with Woodpecker sits in her attic naked and shits in literally in a bucket and has someone come and get it for her so she can study a pack of Camel cigarettes so distinct, like so hardcore for months, that she attains perfect clarity of that pack of cigarettes. And Robbins describes this in detail, and it's in such a fun way. But he shows that in yoga and many other traditions, and even Christianity, that fixation on a divine image or an object is one of the best ways to lift yourself up and out of everything, because you stop focusing on self. You stop focusing on this overthinking, self-referential nightmare that you've created in your mind, because that's what depression is a lot of the time. It's a bunch of just overthinking, just endless self-analysis and comparison and all of these things. And Tom Robbins, for the love of God, will liberate you of that. Go read one of these two novels. It will not only teach you how to love, but it will teach you about how to use drugs, how to get into this objecthood or this dharana stuff. It will teach you how to mesh your life with the cycles of the moon. It will teach you how to live forever. This is the type of epic stuff that will help lift you out of depression. When I read this, I knew that I was looking at my ex and I was like, you are not the fucking one. Like, Jesus Christ, you absolutely suck. And then when I met my wife, I gave her this book and she was like, yeah, I'm down to ride. Let's be anarchists. And I was like, hell yeah, let's go. And so this is what you are looking for. This is the type of energy that is going to pull you out. Sometimes you need to be literally exploded with dynamite out of your mindset, or you'll just sit and wallow there forever. So next on our list, we have The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. And I love this one because it shows the dichotomy of two different people who are in malignant mindsets. We have Thomas on one hand, who is very light about everything. He views life as this form of detachment, which so many people who are depressed do. He believes that he shouldn't he should have pleasure without any consequences, that he can have these affairs with women and never have to be too emotional about his family or love or anything in life. And then on the other side, we have Teresa, and she feels everything way too deeply. She has the pain of consciousness, the pain of weight. And Kundera in this, through this kind of duality, explores these two sides, because this is it. I know the sad boys out there who are just totally, I have an old friend who I don't really talk to anymore, just, time separates you. And he could pull any girl when we were in Las Vegas, just those beautiful girls, go to the strip and get anyone. He had a good job, good looking, 205 pounds, 9% body fat, ripped, funny, all these things, but rich family, nice house, but he was like clinically depressed. And he had this unseriousness to him, this lightness that never let him really do that. And I've known I've known so many sad girls who haven't tapped into that lightness, who are way too serious about everything. Everything is emotional. Everything has to be reacted to with sadness or anger or some of these things, and they don't have that lightness. But kind of one of the themes is that, you have to find that balance of weight if you want to live a meaningful life. And if you don't, you are going to be depressed and like having these problems. And so this is a love story at some level, but also, this big kind of symbolic journey through depression and the main mindsets that make people fall into it. And so there we go. Boom, bada, connect. We did it. We talked about these novels. We got more than 10 on this list. I just gave you guys enough to hopefully cure your depression and lift you out of it. And so thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for going on this journey with me. And I will see you guys very soon tomorrow, as always, in the next video.